Welcome, everyone. I am so sorry, a little technical difficulty. This is Denise Murtha Bachmann with Cellevators. We're here on Blue TV, which is, so I want to welcome everyone by first saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. If you know me well, you know I always start my lives that way because regardless of the fact that we're in 2025, no matter where we are and what time zone we might be in, we can all come together at one time, at one place, and have amazing conversations. So here on Blue TV on Wednesdays, we're in our second season. This is, I think, our third episode launching this season. We talk about all things related to our success here on LinkedIn after we get to know who our guest is. So today I'm super excited to have Darius here joining us. We're going to talk about some exciting stuff because it's stuff that I don't really know anything about, which is all related to climate finance. So stay tuned for more about that in just 1 minute. But as we start to have that conversation, I want to welcome everyone who's out there. Let us know where you're located. So drop it in the comments below and let us know where you are. I'm here in Houston, Texas. I know Darius is in Washington, D.C., but he can share a little bit more about him in just one brief second. But be sure if you are on Team Live, just let us know now so we can engage with you. And if you're on Team Replay, leave us the hashtag Team Replay and we will come back and have amazing conversation, but let us know where you're located. This is sponsored by Market Me More and Top Voices Unite. Super excited to have you guys here Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Central Time and 11 a.m. Eastern, and then you guys can figure out the rest of the time zones. But Darius, I'm so excited to have you. He is, again, he's going to do his own introduction because I cannot at all do him justice, but he is a board member and advisor to, seems like a million different organizations. I'm exaggerating, but he does have his hands in really some prominent organizations that he's working with. He's been a UN member related to climate change, which I think is so super cool. He has a ton of certifications, but again, I wouldn't do him justice. So Darius, I would love for you to take it over and really just introduce yourself. And once you do that, then we can really start to understand what climate finance is and really dive into the different pathways and the importance of sustainability today and how climate finance really plays a role in that. So Darius, take it over with your introduction, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Denise. And it's great to be here. Thanks for creating space and time for us to share content on this topic. And thanks to Blue TV and Market Me More, Top Voices Unite for creating this space. As you kindly introduced me, I'm Darius Nassiry. I work with the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, currently as a senior fellow, but prior to this role, I've had a number of other opportunities to contribute to climate and finance. I started my career as a banker in the energy and utilities space. I spent a number of years in international economic development. And during that work, I realized that climate change would have significant adverse effects on development progress in countries outside the United States as well as in the United States. And for the last 15 years, I've had a number of roles that have allowed me to bring some of my banking background and finance training to the question of how do we mobilize capital for clean energy investments and sustainability priorities in developing countries as well as in the United States. That's my background. I think the problem we face is more important than me personally, and that's why I'm so excited to be active on LinkedIn, because this is a global challenge. How do we contend with the effects of a warming planet? We're going to need everyone in this fight, and that means developing communities using digital platforms such as LinkedIn to engage people, draw their interest, help inform them, guide their understanding of priorities, and advance together. That's why I think the LinkedIn platform is so effective at building a global network and bringing people to this cause.
Creating awareness, right? Creating awareness.
Deepening understanding and mobilizing people for the priorities we have to identify and then deploy capital and human effort toward. So my own background is in energy, and that's been my focus, but there are many other areas of the climate challenge that we need to address.
Yeah, and I've been spending a little time understanding, like, for example, carbon and carbon credits and that space. So there's a lot that we can do as it relates to sustainability. I do want to take a pause and I want to welcome Kalima and Henry for being out there. Kalima's out in Zambia and Henry is in DC. Oh, so Darius, not that far from you. Since you're in the DC area. So thank you to you guys out there for joining us. Again, if you are just now joining us, be sure to leave us where you're located so we can come back and acknowledge, and be sure to ask questions. We are watching the comments, and I know this is going to be a topic that is new to many of us, because this is Darius's role, is really trying to create more awareness around climate change, finance, just sustainability in general. So talk to us a little around what actually climate finance really means.
Great. Well, climate finance, by the UN definition, refers to all financial flows addressing the causes and consequences of climate change. There is a specific phrase in the Paris Agreement that describes how we need to align all financial flows with the objectives of the agreement, maintaining global temperatures below 1.5 or 2 degrees of global warming and building a resilient global economy. So the UN definition is quite broad. I was just at a seminar earlier today where folks in this area of the country, the Mid-Atlantic, are talking about climate finance in a narrower definition that has more to do with mobilizing capital for specific types of assets, solar, wind, mini grids, and startup companies involved in this space. So part of the challenge in working in the space is just defining what level of intervention you consider to be your priority. Do you want to work at the global level, UN-style interventions, negotiating treaties? Do you want to work at the national level, helping countries mobilize money for their climate priorities? Do you want to work at a corporate level, maybe in the US or abroad, helping that company advance its priorities in the climate or clean energy or resilient space? Or do you want to work at the project level, mobilizing capital for a specific solar farm or wind energy facility or a battery plant? So there are a number of different levels of intervention people can consider as they think about where in the climate finance space they want to engage.
Yeah, and I'm taking copious notes. So when I ask, because this is a space to me that is a little bit more foreign, like I'm not so as knowledgeable as I would like to be. So I am writing. But if we think about, there's the global, national, corporate level, and then just project-based. If we're talking to those that are out there listening and watching, and we welcome Stefan, I'm guessing it's Stefan, or Stephen. I mean, I pronounce it in German, we pronounce it Stefan. So welcome, Stefan. If we think about those that are out there listening on LinkedIn, and if we're wanting to just create awareness, most of us are not going to really be able to dive in at the global level. So if we're talking about talking to those out there right now that are listening, or even in the next, few weeks that are listening to this video, this live stream, which is now being as a replay, where would we, as the common average folk, where would we start? I'm guessing project, but maybe can you guide us as to where you think we should be starting to dive in?
Well, I would start in the areas that naturally attract your interest. This is a personal journey as much as it is a communal one. And I think people have natural interests and abilities that will help guide their starting point. If you're interested in the global picture, the UN has multiple resources that are available through the UNFCCC. That's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It has a secretariat that sits in Bonn, Germany, and produces content. There are numerous think tanks in Washington and outside of the US who have studied and explored the questions around climate finance. The World Resources Institute, WRI, my former home, Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, another brilliant think tank in London, Overseas Development Institute, now called ODI Global, have done pioneering work on the questions that are directly related to how do we mobilize enough capital to pay for the climate investments that we need to keep the planet livable. And I think that's the central question in climate finance. I guess if you wanted to boil it down to two main questions, it comes down to How do we mobilize capital to pay for the climate investments we need to reach the Paris Agreement goals? And how do we protect the economy from the impacts and stresses of climate change? On the resilient side, how do we protect our livelihoods, our physical properties, our economy more generally from the shocks and stresses of climate impacts? And those two questions are, broadly speaking, the mitigation question and the adaptation question. And then,
Yeah, so I think when you talk about then what I'm hearing is when we talk about climate finance, it's really about how do we allocate the funds, and how do we actually, first, how do we get funds, and then how do we allocate them? And I'm guessing it also is which projects, which sustainability projects do we allocate them to? So how do we get funds? How do we allocate them? And to which ones of higher importance are there, or higher priority do we start focusing on? Fair?
that's exactly right. And that's been the principal challenge and focus of the climate finance community for as long as I've been involved. Not only allocating, but mobilizing. How do you attract capital to these priorities in a world where investors have a wide range of options to choose from? Everything from government bonds to corporate debt to venture capital, and there's a whole portfolio of options in terms of what they call the capital stack
Yep.
project, but also a wide range of options for investors. I think many of us in the climate finance community often assume that everyone should prioritize climate investments, but in fact, in the real world, investors have lots of choices, and that makes the burden on making the case for climate investments so important.
So what are we doing? Chenny, thank you for being out there. And Emmy also is out there, Emmy Charles, and he says there's an argument that the collective human intention is the greatest cost on climate change, that pouring money into technologies and techniques while humans don't truly care about the environment on an individual level is a waste of resources. Do you think that renewing the human mindset on the environment is something that should be included as part of climate finance that anyone can work on at an individual or local community level? So that was a lot. So I apologize that I had to read that all. So that's a question to you. If we talk about what I'm hearing Emmy is asking is if we consider, and Chenny, if you can take the comment off now, that'd be great. If we talk about, not because we don't want to see that, Emmy, but because it was such a great one, it took up a lot of space. And I want Darius to really have an opportunity to speak to this. But what I'm hearing, what I'm reading that you were asking was, I mean, it is going to have to start with us as individuals and our mind space and how much we value or not value our climate or our earth today, even our world that we live in, because it is going to have to take a shift on each of us to actually have any sort of impact. Would that be fair? And is that what you read also, Darius?
Well, I mean, this is a space that tends to become technical very quickly. People often get drawn into the details of how the carbon markets work, or how much does a particular carbon credit price in the market, or how do we build a blended finance structure for a particular investment or platform or fund. But almost everyone, I'd respond in a couple of ways. First, I think almost everyone in this space that I've worked with is deeply emotionally committed to a sustainable future. So we start with a point of genuine personal emotional concern and engagement. And that's a good place to start. In addition, I would say that over time, people do often reach a more spiritual conclusion about how we should behave on the planet. We have been told, partly by fossil fuel companies, that we need to focus on our carbon footprint and take personal responsibility for our levels of consumption. And that's true, but that's not really going to be enough to lower emissions. And we've seen emissions continue to rise over time. There will have to be more drastic interventions if we want to maintain a livable planet. And the third thing I would add, Denise, into this person's astute comment, I'd quote back a comment I enjoyed reading from a fellow named Gus Speth. He now teaches law at University of Vermont, but he was one of the founders of the World Resources Institute, WRI, I mentioned earlier. I'll read you the quote. He says, "I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong, he says. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. That's Gus.
That is, I think that totally represents, because I think, Darius, if I think about my daughter, so she is 15. And I know I'm doing a poor job. Now, my husband is German, totally into conservation, right? Germans do everything that they can to conserve in every aspect of life. And he recognizes that here in the US, we don't. In general, the US is really terrible at it. And I'm doing a very poor job of educating my daughter. Like, she doesn't realize the impact that she has when she just throws a water bottle away instead of getting a Stanley cup and filling that over time, each time with water, right? Because she just thinks that, she'll drink a bottle of water. Now, I'm using an extreme example because she does actually use her Stanley all the time. She cherishes that. I think she thinks it's cool. But there was a time, and there are other examples outside of a water bottle, but there are many who probably don't even think twice about consuming water bottles and throwing them out. And so I do think that's such a poignant observation, that it does have to start, because we do have a lack of apathy, and there is greed in capitalism and having us buy all of these water bottles. I'm using that as the most simplistic example, but that resonates. I hear it. I experience it.
I think our modern economy has invited us and created the opportunity for us to live lives of extraordinary comfort and wealth. By comparison to the rest of the world, we in America are extraordinarily wealthy, and it doesn't take much travel to open people's eyes to not only how different other countries live. In Europe, there's often a greater, as you mentioned, a greater environmental awareness. It's not perfect by any means. And in many other countries, that level of wealth and convenience is just not available. I think part of the challenge we face is, speaking personally, is that we have become accustomed to a very high level of convenience. We want what we want with almost no transactions costs, and that has a carbon impact on the world. Right. In addition, that's defining what wealthy looks like for many other folks in the world, and therefore folks who are coming up through industrial and economic development aspire to this level of consumption, which is itself quite damaging to the planet, I think. So we need to reflect on what we want the future to look like. And what gives me encouragement, I also have a daughter, teenager, is I believe that this next generation, your daughter's generation, my daughter's generation, I believe, is more empathic and concerned about the future of the planet than our parents were, who lived in a less polluted world. And I think that restraint on consumption is beginning to show in a number of ways. Small things like thrift shopping can sometimes be the first choice for this next generation. Carrying your own water bottle instead of throwing a piece of plastic away. But yes, I think if we are going to solve this problem, it's going to take more than elegant financing solutions. It's going to take behavioral change, and underneath that behavioral change, hopefully a deep cultural shift that will reduce our consumption of single-use plastics and eventually less dependency on fossil fuels and the emissions they involve.
Yeah, so Emmy, I hope that answered your question. I know Stefan said right after that, Sea-Space Technology and Global Project is answering this question. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I don't know the company or technology well enough, but that's exciting and worth knowing about.
Awesome. So we will go check that out, Stefan, after this. I know Mark was saying one of the big challenges for climate finance is that the most meaningful investments in climate action are led by local municipalities through infrastructure investments and decarbonizing assets and fleets. Problem is, most projects don't meet minimum investment thresholds. Any thoughts on ways to connect finance to where it matters most, at the local level? So the question was, any thoughts on ways to connect finance to where it matters most at the local level?
That's a great question, and it's true. I mean, cities, local municipalities are going to be the locus of climate action going forward. More people are living in cities, cities are a much more efficient way of organizing human communities from an energy and emission standpoint. Surprisingly, one might not expect it, but a city like, say, New York is much more energy efficient than having people much more spread out, living apart with the transport and electricity requirements that a city like Atlanta, for example, would offer. And you can see the carbon footprints of cities vary quite substantially based on how they're designed and organized. The fact that cities are the locus of climate action and will represent where we build the infrastructure for a more sustainable future is a super important question in climate, and is often treated as a sort of secondary consideration in global discussions, which often typically focus on nation states and countries. So, for example, what cities do in any country doesn't often get added up into the climate pledges that countries submit to the UN. At the same time, if that's where the infrastructure is going to be built for energy, transport, efficiency, we need to focus on how to make sure cities get the capital they need and can form attractive investments for investors to prioritize those interventions. And what that means is that we need to look closely at how cities are organized from an institutional standpoint, a governance standpoint, so that they have the capacity to identify projects that are sound, design those projects, implement them, and importantly, mobilize capital for those projects. I've done some work in a prior role on cities' climate finance. It's a rich opportunity space for folks coming into the economy now, looking at how to help on climate change, because anything you learn in a city can be scaled to other cities. They often have very similar problems. When I was living in the Nordic region, I learned that for many Nordic countries, all of them as far as I know, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, have collective financing structures where municipalities form funding co-ops. And that entity then raises money on the capital markets, sometimes internationally, and then allocates capital from that bond issuance, for example, down to the municipality, who can then invest money in local infrastructure. So that's one answer to this very good question. We looked at that model of municipal financing, which is very well understood in the Nordic region, but has not been exported to other regions yet. I think it should be. We looked at that as a model that we could potentially scale globally, and asked ourselves, when I was working with ODI, could we form a cities development bank, much like the World Bank, that has countries as members, a bank with cities as members, and did a feasibility study of that concept that attracted attention from folks who are interested in how do we achieve sustainable development goals at the city level where the action is. And I think that idea still is worth pursuing and testing out. But there are many interventions at the city level that should be pursued. New York has a very active program around energy efficiency investments, and in fact has passed laws that require buildings to have a certain emissions footprint that gradually ratchets down over time. So there are some pioneering examples. Los Angeles has just suffered devastating wildfires and is now taking steps to think through how do they want to design that area and what lessons can be learned for sustainability and resilience in other parts of the country. And lastly, I'd say this is not a theoretical finance issue. This is a real life issue for many people who live in municipalities that might struggle to maintain their credit rating because of climate shocks or stresses, as well as individuals who are going to face higher insurance bills in places like California, Texas, Florida, as these climate stresses begin to affect their insurance rates. And that's a real world problem that affects property values and the ability to renew your mortgage, refinance your house, or sell your house. And that creates the potential for real financial stress in the economy that we all have to care about and pay attention to.
Yeah, I'm not feeling, as a resident of Houston in Texas, I'm not feeling that pressures yet, but I can imagine. I mean, if I think about the amount of footprint it takes for me to drive my daughter to and from school, which by the way is a 20-minute drive, go pick her up, pick up my son, take them to their softball and their baseball. I mean, I probably drive easily. I mean, from the at the end of the week, I've driven to Alabama and back, in Huntsville, Alabama, and back, with the amount of driving and that's a huge footprint. And I'm one person. If I would carpool with someone, right? But our schedules, our craziness don't always align. If I could carpool, I could eliminate and go down to one. But I could imagine, because of examples like that, as we start to see more and more of these climate issues and more policies around, I'm certain we'll feel that pain a bit more, I would guess.
I think individual transport choices make a difference. How we design cities is the first most important thing to get right on the city's infrastructure piece. And some of that's locked in because of the way we've chosen to design our cities, in America especially, but Europe has smaller cities, so that's just their historical legacy. Then we have transport choices given the city design. How do we get from point A to point B? We will have options that are not just one brand on electric cars, thank goodness. And that is mathematically shown to have a much lower carbon footprint. And if we open our economy to other options, we may have changes in our own auto industry, but I've ridden in Chinese electric cars and they're excellent. Think of a really nice Toyota Corolla, but completely quiet, clean, modern, and inexpensive. And that's the way the rest of the world will develop their auto industry and their auto fleet. And then the next generation will be automated electric cars. I was in a Waymo last week in San Francisco. You get in this electric Jaguar. I would like to say the driver is excellent. He or she, the digital driver, was. It feels weird. I have to tell you, Denise, looking at cars driving around San Francisco, it's like weirdly dystopian. You're looking at the future. When you're in the car, you feel like you're with a very safe driver who pays attention to all the rules and is probably better than anyone I know, maybe even better than I am in driving in San Francisco. And this is like a million years of, I don't know, millions of hours of experience training these cars. So it's quite possible that if not for your daughter, then her kids, if she has a family in the future, will not have to learn how to drive. They may ask, what's a driver's license? Because the fleet that services a city like Houston or San Francisco or Washington will just be driving around. You'll subscribe to it. You'll jump in a car that drives by. It'll take you to your destination. You'll never have to worry about parking or lease payments or insurance payments. Transportation will just be part of the fabric of our lives. And it will be surprisingly much less expensive and much more efficient. And think of all the parking spaces freed up for outdoor cafes, improved lifestyles. Paris, the mayor of Paris, essentially banned cars from downtown. And I can't wait to visit the city someday in the future and see how many bikes are now riding around. That's how people get to work now. And that change happened very quickly. Humans can adjust to changes very quickly if that becomes a social norm. And I think that's what we'll see in the future.
I love that, because I think you're right. There is going to be a time in the not so far away future where we do see that our grandkids are not going to have to drive. And I don't think it's going to be allowed anymore, with as much as it's costing with the tolls that we're seeing with death and crashes and insurance. I think they're going to want to have safer ways for us to get to and from. That being said, I know Nikki asked a question and we are starting to run short on time. So I do want to recognize those who have been engaging with us. I know, Henry, we did not put your statement. We showed your statement. We did not announce it or read it out. We'll make sure that we come back and engage with you on that. We appreciate all comments. Nikki asked a question. Have you seen any compelling use cases where blockchain or digital tokens were used to scale clean energy adoption or track carbon offset effectiveness?
I'll answer that question briefly because there's a lot more there, and maybe that's a subject for a future webinar with more expert guests on that. There certainly has been a lot of theoretical exploration around the potential uses of blockchain technologies for climate finance, including mobilizing monies for climate investment. There was an interesting treatment of a carbon coin concept in the book called Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. That's an idea that holds some promise, possibly in the future. And more mundanely, the World Bank has done important work on integrating blockchain technologies into tracking carbon credits. And there are countless other examples of companies that have seen the promise of these new technologies and integrating them to climate finance. I would not be doing justice to that very important question with this brief answer, but suffice it to say that that's a rich vein and could be its own session on Blue TV in the future.
Well, this has been a wealth of information. So I want to see if I can maybe try to bring it back to those of us who are out there watching, who are learning first about, or at least becoming first aware to what climate finance is. And what I heard you say was there are several different ways you can get engaged, which was the global, national, corporate level, or even project based, right? And it is a personal journey. And we are going to have to make shifts in the way that we see our future and the way that we want to be a part of that future, which is a real mindset, a mind space shift in that we really want to see this earth continue to grow and allow our children and grandchildren and all of those to come after to have this safe place where they can actually thrive more than just survive. But if we're thinking about, so I hope I summarized that fairly well. Would that be a fair summary?
I think this is the most, if one of the most, if not the most important challenge we face as a species, as a civilization, as a country. And if we want to create a livable future for our children and generations to come, everyone has to recognize the importance of this issue and think about how they want to contribute. Everyone has a role to play. It's not only about reducing your carbon footprint, it is about developing a deep sense of empathy for nature and each other, our community, and then thinking about how do we mobilize our efforts, including financial expertise, if that's one area where you could contribute, in the direction of a more sustainable economy. And I think that's it's a great opportunity for the next generation to engage in something really meaningful.
So I do want to make sure that we talk about how you're doing this on LinkedIn in a brief moment. So we'll segue into that. But I think the takeaway that I would ask everyone, and you can expand. Tell me I'm crazy, Darius, but I think my takeaway for everyone as it relates to climate change, climate finance, is find a way to educate yourself and pick what fosters the passion for you. So for me, it is I'm learning about carbon credits right now, and I think that's where I want to spend some time in that space. There's so many different sustainable projects out there that you can tap into. As you mentioned earlier, it's solar, there's carbon. I mean, there's a ton of them. So find what really drives your passion and find a way to just get involved. You could even just start educating your family at home, because it does start with us and our families. And once we then do that, then we can expand out, or as we're doing that, we can expand out and pick whatever project based, or whether you want to get involved in the city, whether you want it to be with your company. Find ways to take your passion and allow others to see that passion, so we can all be guiding in our futures in the right direction. Fair?
That's a perfect summary. And it's so important that everybody sees the opportunity that the climate finance or climate change opportunity to engage starts from the inside. It's personal interest and passion. If you're interested in carbon markets, there's plenty to learn. In the last 15 years or so that I've been involved, when I started, you could sort of know everyone. I mean, everyone was one degree of separation away. It was a relatively early stage community of interest. The solar people knew the wind people, carbon people knew the battery people. We've seen in the last decade or two a Cambrian explosion in this space. So you can now have a full career specialized in just solar, just wind, just finance, just carbon markets, and even within carbon markets, forest credits, carbon credits from capture and storage. There's a wealth of opportunity for professionals who are engaged now, professionals coming into the economy in the future. The most important thing is to start and recognize that this is a lifelong journey. And to pivot to LinkedIn, what's powerful about this platform, Denise, is it's a free online resource, essentially free, that provides an infinite amount of content, live and current information on a rapidly expanding sector. And people can shop and find content and contacts and networks that will animate their passions, educate them, and enable them to develop personal platforms of influence that they can then shape their own careers and identify new opportunities. It's something that we should all be very grateful for, because 20 years ago, this kind of coordinating mechanism didn't exist. You'd have to educate yourself on an ad hoc basis through personal effort with a much higher transactions cost. Now we have a relatively inexpensive source of content and the ability to quickly mobilize efforts globally. And that's what I think is so exciting about the LinkedIn platform and the way I use it is simply to educate and share content with a growing community. It's been very pleasant to see the level of engagement people have to science, policy moves, technology breakthroughs, policy reversals in some cases, as well as progress from individual companies and thinkers in the space. And I try to share all of that in as direct a form as possible. And that's so far been a very positive, we've had a very positive response from the community as it grows around those themes. And I think that's what I can contribute using LinkedIn. I hope that this video and interview will help enhance the community's understanding of some of these issues. And I think it's going to continue to grow. Hopefully we can continue to foster and grow that community as we move forward.
Well, and I think we're seeing that growth exponentially right now. I mean, when you and I first started, it was used as a resume platform. Now we're seeing, millions and millions of new people every day, and people who are creating content. If we think about, this concept of creating awareness, we started off the conversation with, your goal was to continue to build awareness, right? And the way to do that is to leverage the opportunities like live streams, to leverage our content that we're creating on platforms such as LinkedIn. If you were to think about how we create that content, I think one of the biggest fears that most people have is really just starting to create. Like, creating content to someone seems super scary. When you talk about a space that, you wonder whether anyone's even going to read your content, right? When you first probably started writing about it, you probably didn't know whether or not people would even start reading it, because it's such a unique space, although one that shouldn't be so unique. We should all be reading and educating ourselves, and we shouldn't have to create that much awareness. It should already be there. That being all said, what do you think was for you the most important step that you took to start generating content?
Well, it feels like it was a long time ago when I started my LinkedIn journey. So I couldn't tell you what the moment was, but I can tell you significant milestones along the way that really made me feel encouraged. There was a story I posted on how the founder of Patagonia gave away his fortune. I was not the first to post that story. Many others picked it up. I think the New York Times covered it. So there were probably a dozen people who gave that decision visibility. But it really resonated with the community that follows my feed. And I had to ask myself, why is that? Why was that particular decision so resonant and interesting to people who would normally be interested, I thought, in technical aspects of climate finance? And I think the answer is, in part, of course, I think as humans, we're very interested in what other humans do. Patagonia is a well-recognized brand, and people are interested in what corporations do on climate sustainability. But I think the real reason was that deep down, people do know that how we've organized our economy, with very wealthy people on one end and perhaps less wealth distribution that has a certain structure and shape,
Correct,
is part of the challenge that we face. And I think the voluntary choice that the founder of Patagonia made to surrender his wealth and put it inside a corporate structure, a fund structure that would allow his company to continue to thrive, but be used for sustainability purposes, resonated because this was an example of someone abdicating their position in a way for the larger purpose. It was a reflection of values and choice that very few people have been able to make at that scale. And I think it reflected to some extent a concern that building an economically unequal society might be counter to the goals we do share for long-term economic viability and survival as a modern economy, as a modern community. So for me, that was a window, much like other posts that have been popular or have attracted eyeballs, engagement. It was a window on what the community really cares about. And to me, that tells me, to the question that was raised earlier around empathy and human values, that what we're dealing with in the climate crisis is more than a technical or financial question. It's also a question of our values and how we've organized our economy. And the fact that you can see that feedback come through a platform like LinkedIn in the number of views that a repeated post had in a short period of time suggests that we do have quite a bit of hope as a society, that deep down our values are aligned with a more equal outcome and a more survivable economic structure.
So what I think I just heard you say was, if you are out there on LinkedIn and you're fearful of starting to generate content, first, do what drives your passion.
Just start. You will find
Yes.
that there will be people out there who share your interests and concerns, who share your values, and who will reflect that shared sense of concern through you by liking your posts, by following you, and you will be surprised. If you're posting things that are relevant to the broader community, the community will find you too.
And oh, by the way, it's okay to evolve, and how you message, how you write, how, what your message is, how you write it, and how you actually generate your content. Like some days it'll be, maybe in the beginning it's all text, and then you add video, and then you do carousels. It doesn't really matter. As you start, and as you put yourself out there, you will find the people who share your values, who have the same passion as you, and you will evolve, right, with the engagement that you have with those that are engaging with you here on LinkedIn. So we have spent a lot of time on Blue TV today on this episode. I want to thank you, Darius, for being here with us. I think the takeaway, and you tell me if I'm wrong, and I'd love for you to share any takeaways you have. I think the one takeaway I got here from both the climate finance discussion and from the LinkedIn discussion, one is climate finance. It's got to start with us internally and figure out what your passion is, and allow your passion to help you drive your activity, your engagement in whatever part of sustainability you want, at whatever level you may want. So that would be my one on the climate finance. And from a LinkedIn perspective, the hardest thing is to just start. So recognize that you will attract the people that want to engage with you based on your values and your passion. So just start. No one really cares. They're not going to judge you. Just have fun with it and share what is passionate to you. That would be my two takeaways.
I think that's all true. And I would add that we're building a global community of empathy, concern, skills, capability, shared knowledge, and understanding. And we are the first generation in human history to have this digital platform that can share this experience, this journey of our lives and our professional development. And LinkedIn is unique that way. I think it's an opportunity for everyone to engage and grow. You're right, starting can be hard, but once you start, that community will form, and you will feel that what you care about is shared by many people. And that community is a global one now. I would add one last thing, and that is the future is not written yet. The economy and the structure, the way we've organized our society, is something we've inherited. We have invented it to a large extent, and we can invent new structures and institutions that can help us solve the challenges we face now. Part of that is using digital technologies like LinkedIn to develop better coordination mechanisms, communities of concern and capacity, the ability to create new institutional interventions that can make a more livable future. So LinkedIn is part of the solution, not only in organizing ourselves, but just as an example of human invention. And I think that's really the third point I'd add. We can invent new approaches to help our children have a more pleasant future than the one we might face absent those interventions. So we should have the courage to invent those solutions and recognize that we are probably stronger working together. And that's another reason why LinkedIn is so powerful as a platform. So thank you so much for creating the space to share these thoughts and have this conversation.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone who is out there. Tank just left a great comment. We'll come back to you, Tank, and engage with you. Thank you for being out there, Tank and Mark and Nikki, Chenny, Henry. I don't want to forget anyone. I'm going down the list. Stefan, and I think Melanie was out there, Emmy, Kalima. I think I covered everyone. If I didn't, I apologize. I want to thank you guys for engaging with us. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave them here. We will come back. If you are on Team Replay, leave us the hashtag Team Replay, and make sure you let us know where you're located and what question you might have. Engage in conversation with us, as we will do that for you. So again, thank you all for being here. We're here Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. You can figure out the rest. I want to thank Market Me More and Top Voices Unite for their sponsorship. And Darius, before we end it all, I would like to ask, where can we find you? I know it's here on LinkedIn for sure. Is that your primary, or is there anywhere else we can find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I hope to come back to Blue TV in the future and share some progress on initiatives I'm working on now. Thank you for convening this discussion and hosting me today. Thank you to Market Me More. Thank you to Top Voices Unite. And thank you to Blue TV for creating a platform for sharing this experience.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. We are going to take it out now. Again, we thank everyone. We'll see you in the comments. See you here next week. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them. And thank you all for joining us today. So Darius, as we close out, if you'll just stay on for a brief moment and we will let the girls take us out. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.